eating Sundays, they will fight their neighbor all along the way.
Oh, you don't love God
if you don't love your neighbor, if you gossip about him, if you never have mercy, if he gets into trouble and you don't try to help him, and you don't love your neighbor, and you don't love God. In the Holy Bible, in the book of Matthew, read the 18th chapter from the 21st verse. Jesus plainly tells us that we must have mercy. There's a special warning in the 35th verse.
Oh, you don't love God
if you don't love your neighbor, if you gossip about him, if you never have mercy, if he gets into trouble and you don't try to help him, and you don't love your neighbor, and you don't love God.
Well, welcome to kind of a short notice, 15-minute later than usual Presbycast, and we're here. Resby's traveling, but, I thought, who's got a similar IQ, skill set, love for professional wrestling, male attractiveness, all that stuff, and I thought, well, it's got to be our friend Job DeLamba. Maybe the there are some very interestingly named PCA pastors. There is a Hace Cargo, but Job DeLamba is right there with it. That's quite the name, and originally from Mississippi, now in Georgia. Is that right?
That's right.
And a Baptist refugee. You are the only kind of Reformed Baptist we really like, which means a Baptist who's not one anymore.
Yeah. If there is such a thing, you should aspire to be like me, one who is reformed from it.
Right, like a Reformed alcoholic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Okay. Well, we're here because it's Thursday. It's funny. Job sent me a text, "Are you having a show tonight?" And I said, "I'm not sure." And Job was very sad. But I'd written a tweet which turned into a Substack, and it's topical. It's about the times that we're in. It's an attempt to be somewhat pastoral regarding politics without being political at all. We may talk about political things, but my concern with the election, any election, and with nationalism and kind of hyper political emphases, it's a pastoral one, and I think that'll come out in the list that we're going to run through. But I came up with a list of 16 thoughts. Now, this is not something you have to agree with. These are thoughts. These are suggestions. These aren't commandments. These are suggestions.
This isn't canon.
No, not at all.
It's good.
And it's hopefully to help people think. Most people liked it. A few people predictably didn't, but we might even try to figure out why that is. So anyway, round up the usual suspects in that respect. So Job's a pastor at I don't know, is it small or medium sized? Small, medium sized. Is that what you are down there in Woodstock, Georgia?
We average about 100 people.
Okay, that's kind of a normal PCA church size.
Yeah, I'd say so.
And and how long have you been there? How many years?
I'm about to finish 5 years. I came January of 2020, so there was nothing on the horizon.
That's right. It was an easy time.
Yeah, and then about February, they started noticing there was this disease that was spreading throughout the world, and I didn't know what to make of it. I'll tell you a story real quick. He's now died, an older man, his first friend I had in the church, and he took me to breakfast at this really greasy diner, and he said, "You heard about this COVID thing?" I was like, "Yeah, it's getting real, isn't it, or something?" And he said, "It's real, man. It's infected a Waffle House employee. And if you can get through them, you can get through anything." So that's when I knew that we were in real trouble. And that was his understanding of this disease.
So I was at the Greenville conference, and there was a little discussion of it, and I was in the restroom about to leave to head home, and there were two, 75-year-old guys talking about it, and that sort of, I noticed that. And by the time I got home, the NBA had canceled all their games.
Mm-hmm.
I remember standing in the kitchen, heard the news, and we thought, okay, this seems like it's going to be a problem. And it was in different ways and for different reasons, which we will not go into.
No, let's not do that.
No. So, but we have our own little, we have a little political pandemic brewing, and we're not gonna get out of it without symptoms. I don't think. I remember. I haven't gone back to find this, but as soon as we heard about COVID, that things were going to be canceled, I remember it was on the show. Resby and I said, "There's going to be a bunch of people that just never come back to church," and that's proven to be true. It was actually a good time for a certain kind of church, but we knew that was going to be the case. But way before that, I remember back in maybe really early 2015, I can find the tweet, and I talked about how little I looked forward to that presidential election, even before Trump was in the picture. Just knowing that a Clinton was going to be in that election, I knew it was going to be ugly, and it did prove to be that way, and it hasn't really let up ever since. We haven't had any peace, love, and understanding in the old USA has not been a fixture. So maybe what prompted this 16 suggestions, thoughts, and we'll get into them. But for now, we'll just see that much. It's a place where I rent an office. It's in a kind of a very old strip mall building. I think was built in 1945 in the secret city of Oak Ridge, Tennessee. It was part of the first. My office is on one end of what was the first grocery store in that town. I don't know why that's not showing, but it will join us. So it's an old building, but it's a strip mall. It's a commercial building, and it's on a busy corner that borders a residential neighborhood, but it's a busy commercial street. And the guy who owns the property, he lets vendors set up in the parking lot, and he's got some regulars. And then if someone just calls him up and says, "Hey, can I set up in your parking lot?" He lets them, or he doesn't. But anyway, he let a guy set up there. He said, "I'm going to be selling flags and T-shirts and stuff." Well, Job, would you like to guess what sort of flags and T-shirts he was selling?
Probably political of one particular party in Canada, I bet.
Yes, and there was an historical battle flag as well.
Oh, well.
If that means anything to you, although the guy might have been very nice, and but he sets up there in the parking lot, and this causes some chagrin, I think some concern, but nobody was paying much attention. And then another vendor who sets up at this corner on this parking lot showed up, and he was not happy about it. And there were words exchanged, and there were engines revved. And the police were never called, but I nearly had a little political battle right there outside the office. Didn't have to lock the door, didn't have to go for any firearms or anything like that. It actually turned out about as well as it could, but that brought it home. There were raised voices on the street, and there was a little drama, and it was connected to this silly season that we're in. So that brought that close to home and made me think about it. So 16 thoughts is what I'm calling this for the Christian citizen. And this is I have ridiculously fast internet, but sometimes it gets slower, and it's not allowing me to add the article on screen now. I'll keep trying, and we'll try to get it on there where it's visible, but we can start going through them. So, Joe, before we get started, what's it like in your area? What sort of pastoral issues or counsel have you given politically and culturally and societally to your people?
The environment is rather it's rather subdued. Um, and maybe where I live, this area is I think Newt Gingrich when he was in the House represented this area, the part where I live. Maybe wider, but certainly where I live. So it kind of tells you where its leanings are, and it's pretty subdued. If anything, there's a little bit of excitement about it. Obviously, it's a Trump-leaning district, and so people seem, I think, a little eager for it. Early voting's there, but I don't think it's not a whole lot of talk. But if there is, it's usually, if he loses, this is going to be really bad. Something of that nature. I haven't talked about it with a lot of people at church in the last few weeks, but when I do, it tends to be in that vein. But I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of confidence in how it's going to go, and for various reasons, there's just not a lot of chatter about it other than it's time to get this thing going. Early voting seems to make people more eager for it to be over, I think. But the counsel I give is usually, honestly, there's a lot of things in here, so I'll probably save that for when we go through the list.
All right, no problem. I am having a hard time getting it on the screen, but we'll just read them out. And of course, there'll be a link in the show notes to this article. So the first thing I wrote of 16, they're brief, pithy, hopefully witty, as in brevity is the soul of, but that'll be up to the reader to decide. And the first one's probably liable to misunderstanding, but let me give you the first one. There is little you can do at this point to affect the outcome of the election. Now, that's just true. This near the election, if you haven't volunteered for a campaign, if you haven't been canvassing, half your neighbors have already voted, and your tweet or your Facebook post or your single yard sign is probably not going to tip the thing. In fact, if you don't live in a battleground state, you're just padding numbers in most places. Now, if you live in a battleground state, you know it, and if you don't, it does. Again, you vote because it's your duty, and you ought to vote. And I support voting. I support working in politics and campaigns and whatever. But don't delude yourself at this point that especially online outrage or giving your neighbor the stink eye, or tearing down your neighbor's yard signs, or getting an even bigger flag for the front of your house is going to make any difference at this point. So, in the notes that I made for myself as we are looking at this, I said, yes, you should vote, but maybe don't do this, which I saw today or yesterday. I mean, you can if you want to, but don't spend a lot of money. Drive around the Walmart parking lot with flags all over the back of your truck. I mean, if you haven't already bought the flags, let's just let that, save that money at this point. And again, don't vandalize your neighbor's yard signs. But there's not much you can do at this point. So am I right or wrong about that?
You're principally right. It's what could you have ever really done? Maybe is the question.
Near right is as close as I get most of the time.
Yeah, so. There's not a whole lot that can be done. I mean, it doesn't mean you shouldn't try. You shouldn't want to get out there and the best you can, encourage some people. Early voting does add a level of how do you say it? Maybe a desire to want to encourage people because they have more time. Actually, in one weird way, early voting might make the tension of pressing people to vote a little easier because you keep telling them you got a lot of days to do this, so go ahead and do it and knock it out and get on it and move on with your life. But yeah, there's really little. It's people have kind of made up their minds. How many people 11 days out don't really know what they're going to do?
Yeah, and I'm thinking online too. Don't
Yeah.
Picking a fight at this point or owning someone is not going to help much.
No. Well, wouldn't it ever help? But
yeah.
it's just going to be irritable to people.
I'm saying maybe there's a chance, but I don't think so. But everybody has a platform today, right? Everybody's got a podcast. Everybody's part of an organization. We have a lot of affinity groups, and they talk to each other in their small number of followers. And it's easy to imagine that one is important when one probably is not. But I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's look at number 2. I did figure out a way to get these on the screen. It'll help a little bit. So, and the second one, second thought for Christian citizens, church members in particular: God is sovereign and will not be surprised by any outcome of this election. Now, that's basic Reformed theology, pretty sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I was I was at the prison tonight, and I was teaching. I did a whirlwind tour from the early chapters of Genesis through Psalm 110 to Hebrews, and covered everything about Melchizedek that I could. But one of the things I noticed when Melchizedek came out to bless Abraham, he basically said, God gave you the victory. Melchizedek was a Reformed theologian. He believed in the sovereignty of God, even with his very limited revelation. It's interesting to think, how did Melchizedek know what to do and say? He didn't have a Bible. He didn't have a book. We don't know how he was spoken to, but he believed in the sovereignty of God. So the question is, do we, and I'll ask you as a pastor, what difference should that make in October and November, and December and January, especially, of 2024?
What difference does it make for the layman Christian, you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, what good is this doctrine of the sovereignty of God? I mean, I'm saying that's something you need to remember, and God won't be surprised, even though you may be. Yeah.
You can rest in that, because this is unfolding in his plan as he works through creation and providence. It's going to unfold at this point as he determines. He is ultimately still king, and will always has been, always will be, and is always ruling. And so the outcome of this election is within and under his realm and decrees and sovereignty. So you can rest assured that the world is ultimately not depending and going to it's going to go in the direction he wants, and it's in his control. And so that does not lead someone to think that I don't have to do anything, or I shouldn't vote, or whatever. But it does say, be comforted that even though you're doing this, this is in the hands and control of God. So don't freak out.
Yes, don't freak out is a great sermon point, or just an exhortation. Don't freak out.
Yeah.
So in my notes, I said, the sovereignty of God, and that God won't be surprised. We hold this Reformed truth to be self-evident. It just is. And this is the time that this is real life, and it's when theology matters. It matters a great deal. You're not going to hear me quote John Piper much, but I remember hearing a John Piper thing when I was still a Baptist, and he made a really good point. He said, we teach about the sovereignty of God and the attributes of God on Sunday, so that when you have to go visit someone at the hospital and their loved one's dying, you don't have to talk about it. You already know that. They already know it. You know it. So you can sit with them knowing that they know. Now, you can remind people, certainly. But our theology should help us here. That's my point. And
this election is about, for president of the most important country in the world, arguably the most important country in the history of the world, but it's not for ruler of the universe and the cosmos. That is already covered and done, so we don't have to freak out about it, and we need to be content in that.
All right, well, let's move on to number 3. and I'll get that posted on the screen shortly. And this is well, it's not practical. It's sort of common sense, but it's got to do with the practical aspects of all this theology. And let me read that. In light of the above fact, that is number 2, the sovereignty of God, be calm for the sake of your family and for your fellow church members. It's just, if you believe God's in control, act like it, and operate on that presumption, which is founded on truth. It's for real. It's not just it's not wishful thinking. It's not something that just works helpfully psychologically for us. It's a real thing. And I think my point here is that, your neighbors might notice, and your coworkers might notice, or your boss or your employees might notice if you're not obsessed about this election at every minute and you're not torn up by it. I think just like going to church on Sunday is a powerful witness, maybe not losing your mind in the fall of 2024 is a powerful witness too. I mean, potentially. It's not guaranteed. You may just make everyone around you mad. But this is practical, and how we act and react, it says something.
Yes. And it's important because you want to tell people, to remain calm over the events that unfold in public and in society. But you have to have number 2 to be able to say that. It's like, you got to be calm. Well, why should I be calm? Well, because God is sovereign over every single thing and event that happens. And so you need that, especially for your family. And because if, they're not as engaged as you are, they're going to come to you and they're going to help. You need to help them discern through how they need to understand it. I don't really think that, being calm means you can't be concerned. I mean, I don't really mind saying it, but I'm fairly concerned about the direction of the country if Kamala Harris wins. I am concerned for a lot of things there. Concern, though, does not mean you can't be calm. And so I think you need to be calm for the sake of those who look to you to understand, because, I don't know about you, but usually when you have concerns and you sense something's wrong, the person you look for is usually the person in a frenzy, right? That's who you want to go to help understand. No, you want to go for the person who seems to have some self-control and understanding of like, okay, they're calm about it, but they're being serious about it and understanding. It will help me move forward. Your kids need to see that, and the church needs to see it. And you're right about the neighbor part as well. Neighbors, non-Christians can get really, upset about these things, and Christians need to model that, to say like, we're not unconcerned. We're not pretending like this isn't important, no matter what it is, before or after. But we can remain calm in this and know and have some wisdom and how to move forward, because God is sovereign and He'll give us direction.
Yeah, they say even dogs can tell if you're, they sense your distress, and your, they can smell it. And I'm sure children, spouses, neighbors, people around us can tell if we claim to believe that God's good and He's sovereign, but we're completely torn up about everything around us. It just doesn't really fit. Doesn't go together. So
especially little kids. I mean, they don't. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, when my oldest son was little, it was the time of the Gulf War, and the CNN had these drums, like war drums. It was their intro music, dun 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 dun. And I remember we had it was CNN, I think, and it was on TV, and my son, who's maybe 3, he hears that and he turns around and looks at me. He says, "That means danger." It did, but it was designed to to unsettle, but we should try to design to not unsettle.
Well, let your young children watch the political ads, and then and then and let them say to you, "Is that true? If that happens, what does that mean for us?" You've got to be able to give a response, and you don't want to blow it off, but you also want to give a response to help them understand, like, listen, remain calm. Not all the ads are true. They might be building up something that's not. It's not entirely going to happen that way.
Yeah. So this is Psalm 140. Well, I'm jumping ahead. Let's move to the next one, and it sounds similar, but I have something different in mind. So it's a little different. Exhibit confidence in God. So sort of intentionally attribute your confidence to God, but on the other hand, be skeptical about the power of any man or woman for good or ill, and it's really Psalm 146, which I love to sing, and we sing, put no confidence in princes, nor for help on man depend. He shall die to dust returning, and his purposes shall end. And that's our theology. That's the theology of the Bible. That's the theology of the Reformed Standards. So there's two sides to the coin: God's ability and man's inability, for good or ill. There's only so much good a man or woman can do, and there may be, hopefully, only so much bad they can do. We know it certainly all goes through God's hands and is under His control.
Yep. Exhibit your confidence in God by expressing that through prayer. Prayer for these different things, building up confidence and singing praises to God, singing good hymns and psalms helps build this up, because you can go forward with it. It's like, well, this is what they intend to do. That's a good word maybe to think about a lot of stuff. This is what they intend to do. Instead of saying, though, this is what they're going to do. That's what they're going to, they say this, and this is what we believe they intend to do. But God has complete authority and is not bound by anything or anyone to stop him. So they can only do what ultimately the Lord would permit, and they are not able to do anything and everything. They're not even able to do anything and everything they feel, even within our own governmental system. And so a lot of times we just need to remind yourself of that, if nothing else. And so, well, this is what they're going to do. Is like, I mean, they can't just do it. Some of this stuff can't just be done. It has to go through the proper ways or improper ways, whatever it is. It can't just automatically be done. And that should give you even more confidence in God that He's working.
Yeah, I think we watch movies and we imagine that all the bad guys on earth are big blockbuster supervillains. Very few of them have white cats that they stroke, although I'm sure a few do. I mean, Soros and Son may approximate the movie supervillain, but even they can be thwarted.
Yeah, and just growing and reminding yourself of biblical truth. Again, it's not a reason to do nothing, but when you have confidence in God, it helps you to know how to act and how you should perceive this, and to remember and say, well, they want to do this. And I know what they want to do, or maybe we don't know, but you're not totally at their mercy one way or the other, and your good and your prospering is not totally at their mercy one way or the other.
All right, let's move on to the next one, and we have them all on the screen now. Do not believe everything that you hear. This is number 5. Do not believe everything that you hear, whether that's good or bad, good or ill. And and then someone didn't like that I mentioned the concept of civil war, but I continued. Nearly every civil war has been fueled by misunderstanding and misinformation. And what triggered that was I was listening to the Rest is History podcast about the French Revolution, which was, I mean, I don't know if you've spent any time on the French Revolution, but about as complicated and shifting as can be imagined. Also about as violent and nasty as can be imagined. But every faction told lies about the other. The populace had bizarre ideas about what was really going on. Now, it's true that there were all these villains, but even the villains were accused of 10 times as much stuff as they were actually doing. There was a rabble-rousing press. There was freedom of the press largely in Paris, and they just printed all kinds of stuff. They just made stuff up for political reasons. And you know what? I think that could happen today sometimes. So don't believe everything that you read or hear. I'm from Arkansas and was actually pretty close to have family members and people who worked for Bill Clinton. I know a few things that I haven't even read about online, that are items that should be on lists that aren't on there. But I tell people, you can't believe everything even that you hear about the Clintons. You can probably believe about 85% of it, but it's not all true. But there are things that you don't know as well. So yes, this is not saying that there's no true information about bad people and bad actors, but you can't believe all of it. And you can have two sides, and they can start believing things about each other, and pretty soon they decide, well, that warrants violence or illegal means to be employed or just lying, and it doesn't. Not if you're a Christian. The ends don't justify every conceivable mean. But anyway, I wasn't trying to say we're going to have a civil war, but misinformation in the Spanish Civil War, there was I hope people have noticed with the Ukraine-Russian war, you can't believe anybody. Both sides are lying to you, and every government who's got an interest in it is lying to you, and you can make it. You can't believe it all, and so try not to misunderstand and believe things that aren't true. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, they have desires of what they want and all their things they put out there. They want you to have certain thoughts. Some of those might be right, but they might want to bend you a certain way, and they're trying to communicate it to you to get you to an end goal that they desire, which is to either vote for their person that they want you to vote for, or to think a certain way about them that would lead you to want to do that. You have to remember with all these ads that no matter what, that right now they have one purpose: to get you to vote for their candidate. And they're going to say things, and they are going to say things that are meant to get you towards that end goal. You just don't need to always take it all and keep that in perspective. What is their purpose in putting this out? And so think through it.
I worked in the news media for more than 10 years, and I can tell you, you can't believe it all. It's not the best and brightest who are leading you there. And with online influencers and shysters and people who are usually trying to sell you something too, ultimately is what it's about. You just got to be careful about what you believe. There's enough true bad stuff to propagate or willingly let yourself believe something that's not true.
Yeah, you don't need them to tell you how to understand everything. That's why I don't like news articles or what's this about? What are they trying to say? What do they want you to understand? It's like, you're telling me what to think. I don't want you to necessarily tell me how to understand this. Why don't you just tell me what happened and let me discern from there? And I think that people would be good to just keep that in mind. Have a right suspicion that these are flawed human beings that have an agenda, for better or for worse, and you need to discern through what they're saying. And you need to have, it's an encouragement also that one of the ways you can not do this is by being grounded in some principles and philosophical ideas or approaches in the way you think about things. And that will help you to discern through that and to know what they're trying to say. And as you get grounded in that, you'll actually not need to hear all this stuff as much. You'll know instinctively, well, I don't really have to believe that.
All right, so number 6, focus on things local. Remember that the government nearest you affects you most of the time, and it's most likely to help you and your neighbors if things go wrong. Having to sit in your house and watch cable news and doom scroll on X, formerly known as Twitter, or Facebook, even worse, and work yourself up, but not know your next door neighbors, that doesn't make any sense. To imagine that something that supposedly is going on, 1,500 miles away in Washington, when you don't know who's on your city council, you've never spoken to a local police officer, that's crazy. And if things did get bad in the country, what's going to protect you? I mean, let's say if there was conflict or the federal government went rogue, your local, state and local officials may protect you. They have the option to do some things. And what's the word? Nullification. They don't have to obey every federal order, and may well be the cause of your deliverance in a way. And so don't just worry about things that are remote and federal, worry about local and state too. It'll make you feel better, and it'll make your local area better. So that's
Yep. They're not, the federal are obviously important, but it's very important that you have a feeling of who your mayor is, and you know who your mayor is, or in your city, your town, or your county. Those things matter. And it'll, if you live, like, we live in the metro Atlanta area, so our county is fairly conservative. Actually, fairly is underselling it. It's very conservative. And the county next door is not. And that makes a difference. And there's noticeable things that are different and things you'll know there. You need to know that, knowing the sheriff and remembering that those decisions, those things they talk about, property taxes are something that's probably as important in your life, whether you recognize it or not, as anything in terms of your finances. And those things are handled on the local levels. That's a big deal around here, is how much are they going to assess property for? I'm not implying that the federal doesn't have any part of that, and whether directly or indirectly, but those things are the big deals, and those affect you most directly. And so you have to remember that. And it's also where you're most invested, because that's, like you said, that's who will help you. If you're worried about crime and stuff, and you hear these ads that talk about it, all this going on, it is good to ask yourself, like, oh, that's happening all over the country. Is that happening in your town, in your county? And if not, why? There may be reasons that have nothing to do with the government, but on another hand, they might be because that local law enforcement has set up and has made it clear that this is not going to happen here, or they deal with things. And yeah, local is always the way to go. It's just like in a church, isn't it? The things that happen with your session and your pastor and their leadership tend to be more effective of your life as a congregation than what's happening in the broader General Assembly.
Or evangelicalism.
Yeah, that's actually even better. Yeah.
Writ large, yeah. All right, so the next one, go to church and go about your business as normal. Now, what I have in mind here is, let's say there's there's what, 3 states have already said we're not going to have the votes counted the night of the election. So it's a nightmare scenario for conspiracy theorists and for actual bad actors and all sorts of things.
Or a dream for a conspiracy theorist. It could be just everything you've ever wanted to indulge in.
But that could be a weird week, and you don't hunker down. You don't stop opening your business. You proceed as normal, and that's what I'm getting at here. The Lord's Day is still most important, and your normal daily business is very important. So that's what I'm getting at there.
Yeah, and it'll help you as if these results are going to take that long, it's going to drive you crazy if you dwell on it and listen to stuff.
Yeah, and
it's read stuff.
It's to be, and that's part of our witness too, is not to be, we're not to be blown about by every wind of doctrine. We shouldn't be blown about by every societal and political wind either. It's just not. It's not our. I mean, you read exactly 0 hand wringing about government issues in the New Testament. Now, I understand it was different then, but there were. My wife is reading. This tells you the kind of person she is. She's reading Josephus right now, and she's talking about all the conspiracies and the zealots and the just brutal warfare. Shortly before AD 70. So there have been political concerns and societal upheaval, even when you had an all-powerful empire over everyone. So that's nothing new under the sun in that respect.
Yeah, proceed, go forward, wait on the results. If you can do something about it, to whatever degree you can request, whatever, but you cannot be freaking out. Freaking out's a big deal right now. Don't do it.
Yeah, you can't fix it with your computer and in your boring job that has nothing to do with politics. So, if you're a state official, it's another thing.
True.
You're not going to sleep much, but for the rest of us, we got to keep going. All right, number 8. Give thanks for the great constitutional freedoms that still exist in the USA. It's a violation of the 9th commandment to say that we're not a very free country, that we still don't have a lot of freedom of speech and movement and economic freedom. Recognizing all the problems that exist, we're greatly blessed in this country. And every era of the United States has had challenges and terrible things. We had a couple of mini wars right after the Revolutionary War. There was the Whiskey Rebellion, and we've had troops on the White House lawn. We've had veterans. They called out troops and shot at veterans after World War I. There's been ugly stuff happen in every era of our country, and it may be worse now than it's ever been, but it's not absolutely unique. But we still have a lot of freedom, and we have the freedom to assemble and to worship, and we should be thankful for that and use it, and not imagine that our Constitution is a failed document, and the best thing we could do is start over with something more authoritarian and more broken up and more uncertain and unknown. So that's my point there.
We have more freedom than even currently, more individual freedoms and rights. I mean, it's been encroached on. It's shrunk, and there are threats, and we can feel that way. But what we do have is still a gift of God and kindness of God to us to let us live in a nation like that, and we should continue to exercise it and be grateful and just again, it's none of this ever is to promote apathy and being totally withdrawn from involvement, care, concern, action, whatever. But again, you have to take a step back at times and remember it's like, well, there's a lot there's just not many places in the world where you can have this much ability to speak freely, to worship freely, and to move about freely, to work and different things like the way we can. It can be better, absolutely, but it is still we are very blessed in the grand scheme of things, and we should want to preserve that as well. But yeah.
Yeah, so be thankful for the freedom that we have, and use it. Use it. Scott Clark's he's got an acronym, POPPL, and it's got to do with ways to take political action, litigate, become involved in politics. But you can look that up on the Huddle blog. POPPL is the acronym, and it's a recipe for engagement, not for retreat, not for quietism, which we do not endorse, whatever some might imagine. All right, number 9 is basic Christian ethics: honor magistrates and pray for them. We have to do that because Paul told us to, and the ministers at my church and the 2 pastoral prayers that we have each Sunday in the 2 worship services almost invariably pray for magistrates at every level. They pray for president, for federal officials, state officials, and local officials, not necessarily by name, but by office. And we have to do that. Whether we want to or not, we are supposed to honor the magistrate, and we're supposed to pray for them, and maybe work to get them kicked out. That could be part of honoring them, to help them find a better use for their life, but we are to do that. So there's not a lot of reason to talk about that, because there's no disputing number 9.
And it will reinforce that God is sovereign, and have full confidence in Him when you pray for them doing what God told you to do. That should increase your confidence in His governance over all things.
Yeah, and imagine if your kids grow up hearing you pray for the magistrates, rather than hearing you, talk badly about them. One day when they get pulled over by the cops or have a decision of some sort to make, it might help them do the right thing, rather than do something really stupid, based on our examples.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so number 10. This is, and you may have to fess up to some stuff on this one.
Okay.
But. And again, when I was in the news business, I've covered riots and demonstrations. I've been in the middle of it, and I've been just in events and things. You just have to be careful about crowds. If there's a crowd at a political event or a demonstration or a protest, or in your neighborhood, there's a crowd forming because people are unhappy about something, you got to think 2 or 3 times before you get involved with that. Because you lose some agency and ability to control your destiny when you're part of a crowd. You look at the crowds in the Bible; they generally don't. It's generally not good. What the crowds come up with and decide. And I've also noticed that the vows they tend to take tend to not be kept. That's just me. David delighted to lead the great assembly in worship, but often when people got together in the Bible, it was not for the best purposes and ends. So we should be careful. So if you're going to be involved in politics, you may find yourself in a crowd, but be careful and be wise.
Yeah, beware doesn't mean you can't be in anything of that sort. It just means just beware that large crowds and large things can get off track with that. But don't avoid necessarily some things. If you don't have to go to any crowd, But, just it's beware of what can go wrong here and what maybe is the point of this.
Yeah, and there are feds and agent provocateurs and all that sort of thing. So when you be careful what you sign up for, even if you're really angry and you think you've really been done wrong. So, and people who have been to large political events, and we've got online mutual friends who have gone to these events, and usually they turn out well. But there's an element of risk, and there's an element of turning your fate over, humanly speaking, to other people.
Yeah, I mean, I went to the Trump rally yesterday, last night, and had a great time, and it was enjoyable. But I would also, can tell you, I've gone to a couple of these things. If beware would be, don't go there, to something like that to totally, um, to just dog on it, or to just, you can go and observe, but you can also remember that you can get pretty ginned up and excited to those things and can start.
It's a revival meeting. It's a revival meeting.
Yeah,
Joe.
you can start losing sight of some of this. I mean, like, you sit there and listen to some of these people talk, and you realize, like, if this goes opposite, we there's no chance of anything ever recovering ever again. Or, oh man, this is set. We're all set now. Once we get this done, everything is going to get back to business. Again, I went to the Trump rally not as a spectator, but as a supporter. I'm going to vote for President Trump and hope he wins, and all this stuff we want to say about it. And not just shallowly. Cards on the table. Generally think he's got a lot of good things he wants to do in there. But I can just tell you, after 9 years of being a voter and supporter of his, the man makes a lot of promises that and says things that are going to happen, and talks that you could think, like, that's going to be so solved once he's in office, and you can forget that, like, a lot of other things have to happen there. He has to have 5,000 appointments to be made, and they have to carry out this, and there's all this stuff underneath it. So beware of the bad side of it, of the anger, but also of the optimism it can raise in you that can get unrealistic if you let it go. And so another way is not just going to an event, but remembering that trends of how things are feeling, trends in polls. You can very much get yourself feeling that this thing is settled and done, and in 13 or 12 short days, everything goes back to normal just by watching polls and watching news. And, well, what if it doesn't? We don't know yet. And that can get you, that can really frustrate you and cause a lot of resentment and frustration. And then you might be tempted to express that, and there's all kinds of bad ways that could go. So just beware of that. Hold the line.
Yeah, and I'll never forget total depravity. The longer I live, the more I believe if you don't get total depravity right, you won't get anything else right in Reformed theology. And when I was a journalist, I covered a lot of politicians, and I knew people who worked for them. I heard things that they said that other people didn't hear. I realized pretty quickly hardly anyone was who they seemed to be, and the true believers in certain politicians were setting themselves up for disappointment. So be realistic, and be hopeful, but don't put your confidence in princes. Remember when the Israelites asked for a king, what did Samuel tell them? God didn't, he knew they were going to have a king, but he didn't want them to have a king. He said, you're going to regret it. So you're probably going to regret any politician that you pin your hopes on, to some degree, in some way. And it's guaranteed.
Yeah, another side's like, beware of the experts who tell you how this is going to go, because that can be very frustrating if it's not like that.
Oh yeah, it's like
Yeah.
a kid who thinks they're getting something for Christmas. And
Yeah, I mean, if you watch stuff and keep up with it, in the ones the people you like, and say you're inclined like I am, you basically should just assume this thing's over, because a lot of the people I listen to and try to gain some information and understanding from are feeling pretty good about the direction of this for Donald Trump. So if I put all confidence in that crowd of people, and he doesn't win, um, that's gonna be really devastating. That could be really devastating to me. I can't bank on that.
all right, so this is a more practical near-term thing. Next one, 11. When the election occurs, be patient with the results. Assume that the bad actors, and there are some, will not prevail. That there's enough checks and balances in this country, enough oversight that we're not going to have a stolen election. And just don't jump to conclusions. Don't do that. Don't do something rash. Jump off the proverbial bridge before the matter is decided. And there is really corruption in this world, but that doesn't mean total depravity doesn't mean it's as bad as it could be. It means it's pervasive, and it affects everything. But it may not be as pervasive. The corruption in our system may not be as pervasive and as one-sided even as we assume. There are lots of ways there are lots of election shenanigans, and a lot of people pull them. But be patient on election night and the day after and the day after that.
Well, yeah, because you better be, because you're unless you stay up for a very, very into the next day would be better than very long. You're not going to know anything right away unless it's just such a massive sweep one way or the other. And even if that's what it's looking like, that's going to be called into suspicion no matter how it goes. So you're going to have to be patient with seeing it settled, and all that. And so I think this is something I would say, be particular about it. How do you be patient with it? It's like, if you start thinking shenanigans are happening, don't start in a frenzy, whether it be in private text groups, other public things you're in, declaring that it's stolen, it's this, it's that, until you don't, because honestly, you're going to look silly if you look back and that's not how it goes.
Yeah, think
don't
of it
declare
like
things immediately.
think of it like a mass shooting or a terrorist attack. The first information is never correct, and you can certainly again embarrass yourself and maybe harm other people, at least by giving them bad information. If you get too far ahead of yourself and too far away from good sense and the truth.
Yeah. Yeah, stuff is gonna be said, and it's gonna look a certain way, or it could. You need to be patient before you declare things publicly to people, because if it doesn't go that way, then again you're gonna end up looking silly to people. And if you want to be calm and collected and have some credibility to help to talk about it, you can't be the person that within 20 minutes of something is like, oh, I see that they claim that this thing happened at a place and at a polling outlet, and now all of a sudden you don't want to be like, oh, see, they've already started it. You just don't know, and you don't want to do that. Just be patient.
All right, number 12, we've sort of already covered. Remember that the outcome will neither be as bad or as good as commentators and politicians would have you to believe. In other words, if all your candidates win, or if none of your candidates win, it won't be as good or as bad as you imagine. That would assume a sort of mechanistic, deterministic outcome. And we do know God's sovereign. He changes things. And again, we just don't put our confidence in these, all of our confidence in these man-made structures, even if God has ordained the people who sit atop them. So that's pretty simple. I don't think we have to say much more about that.
I would only add that whenever one reason it will be they're neither good or as bad, they still have to govern and do the thing. And so one way to remember that is like, okay, they won, but now they have to actually do it, or they have to implement what they're going to do. So just keep that in mind as well. And that will not be as good as you think or as bad as you think.
Yeah, and the bad guys might do bad stuff. They might do good stuff accidentally and fulfill God's purposes against their own desires.
Right.
And, our air quotes good guys could become incredibly corrupt and do incredibly stupid things, and the outcome could be horrific. We could get involved in something where it all goes south and make things worse, not better. So you just don't know. All right. There were people who didn't like some of these things. I hope number 13 was not one of them, but I think it probably was. And that is that politeness. And this, again, we're getting back to the people you run into, your neighborhood, where you work, where you go to school. Politeness matters. It tends to peace. And that just means, especially if you know someone doesn't agree with you, or you're pretty sure you look at them and they're for the other side, or they've got one side, they've got the opposite side in their yard that I have in mine. If you're kind to those people and polite to them, that's that's sort of like heaping coals on the head of your enemies. Not exactly, but it may go a long way towards maintaining peace, which is, I think that's a good thing and something to be desired. You can't go wrong, holding the door for someone, saying hello, yielding the right of way, and just treating other humans like humans, even if you don't agree with them about hardly anything. If they're not actively trying to do harm to your property and your family, it's probably okay to try to get along with them and be nice to them as far as you can. So I hope this is not controversial.
Well, what's the alternative? To be rude to them all the time?
Well, it usually works. It's usually that's often such a good, wise approach. And so, I had a guy, two people that were at odds in my parking lot, and a kid was menacingly racing his engine and kind of lunging in his vehicle. And, there was sort of some aggression there, and it didn't help, but cooler heads prevailed, and that this was over a political issue, maybe with some racial overtones, but it didn't need to go there, and it didn't ultimately. Be nice to people, even if you don't like them or agree with them, as far as you can, as far as it lies within you. Be at peace with all men. I think that's from an ancient book, with 66 parts. So,
well, I mean, it's also like, if they're the aggressor, like what are you going to get out of this by being aggressive and rude to them? What's the best case scenario? If they're angry and upset about something, and they're just trying to rile you up, like there's nothing good's going to come out of this.
You can compare your handguns. You can both show each other your handgun, and then you can see whose works best. But I think that's not what you want.
It's an option, but I wouldn't suggest it.
Yeah. So let's not meet our neighbors in that way if we can help it. All right. So number 14, being a good neighbor will be more important than ever. This is related to that. But if you're a neighbor that has the opposite party sign or the intersectionality flag, or I don't know, there's any number of signals, indicators, memes, visual representations, or maybe things they have said or done that tell you that you don't agree with them. But if they need their battery jump started, or a limb falls across their yard, or their Amazon package falls out of the mailbox and it's in the street, pick it up. If they're sick or out of town, take their garbage can back to the house. Offer to feed their dog if they go out of town. There's no downside to that engagement. That doesn't mean your kids get the idea that you agree with them. It might just be they get the idea that their parent is not a jerk, and is trying to do the right thing by neighbors. So, but in this time, in a time of societal stress, neighborliness is probably more important than in normal times when things are good and everybody agrees, right?
Right. But, a lot of times we might assume that this person is totally driven and thinks constantly about politics and the social state and different things that are going on. And those people exist. And if you're saying, well, how would I spot them? Like, oh, you'll know. You'll know quickly. But for a lot of people, that's just not the way it is. You don't have to have your relationship with people based entirely around political issues. You don't even need to know a lot of the times. Because what this is doing is putting more stock in these things than there really should be. And your friendships, your relationships with your neighbors doesn't need to be that way. And further, if your neighbor is like that, and you say, I wish they would change, you may mean a change of 180, but at minimum, you want them to calm down. And if you want them to calm down, if you have any way to help them with that, you being normal and not making this the center of your life and conversation with them, and being friendly and kind and just whatever is a good way to approach that with them. And you don't need to determine how you're going to treat them based on them having these particular differences with you. You can show kindness and mercy to people because God makes it to rain on the just and the unjust. There is common grace. There is mercy shown to people in this world by God that are his enemies, that yes, there will be ultimate justice, but in the meantime, they still, there's mercy shown to them. And you should do the same. We Christians should excel in this, where this is not the center of our being, and we are not determined in our relationships simply by the way things are in the country.
All right, number 15. This sort of assumes maybe an outcome you might be happy with. Let me preface this with a story. In my neighborhood, there's a house owned by a married couple, civilly married in the eyes of some state somewhere. They're of the same sex, and it's pretty obvious what's going on there. But they also happen to be obnoxious fans of a rival SEC school, one of the SEC schools that are most obnoxious of all. And they have a flag, they fly flags and they decorate, and that's pretty offensive too. But I try to be polite to them if I see them, if I come across them. I'm not under any illusions about what's going on with these two people. But I try to be as irritated about their SEC school of choice as everything else about them. and I try to maintain a bit of humor about this. And I've never been tempted to vandalize their house, except maybe to maybe burn their flag, which is for the school with the big elephants. But I didn't do it. So number 15 is do not taunt or respond angrily to taunting, whatever the outcome. So just like I don't go in front of their house after Tennessee beats their school and shoot fireworks off or razz them, we shouldn't do that with our neighbors. When if your neighbor pulls for the other candidate or party, don't make gestures at them if they lose big. Don't put up 3 more signs or throw all your signs on their yard. Don't be a jerk. You may be right, but don't be wrong in the way that you're right. I go back to the Big Lebowski, and Walter would say, "Am I wrong?" And the dude would say, "No, Walter, you're not wrong. You're just blank." So we don't need to be that. We don't need to be needlessly offensive, and we need to commiserate at the appropriate level. We can understand, okay, this person's not happy, and I'm gonna try not to provoke them. So no spiking the ball is what I'm saying.
If you have never Trump neighbors, family, or if you have people who are going to vote for Kamala, and assuming this is a big win, before you get into maybe spiritual and eternal matters, just take a step back and say, you want them to come to understand, right? Don't you want, most people would say, I want them to come to understand that this is a better situation for this country, and obviously that includes them. And one of the reasons they may not like certain things about Trump and maybe supporters of Trump is this kind of stuff. That's the exact thing they would expect. Even it's wrong to expect that, maybe you could say, but look, don't think that that's going to help. Look at it as an opportunity to, in your kindness and not taunting about it, of confidence in yourself and confidence in the Lord and the positions you might hold that if you think they're good, but use it as not by not taunting, so you can actually have a conversation with them and talk to them later on about it and help them to maybe understand better. And because they're going to have 4 years of this, so you set yourself up for the future. I will say one caveat is that, if your neighbor voted for the Libertarian Party, you can taunt them a little bit. You've kind of earned it at that point.
There we go. Yeah, they're just sad. I mean, I have a lot of libertarian principles, but most principled libertarians say the Libertarian Party is stupid and insane. So yes.
Yeah. If you voted third party, maybe, and you had a sign out for it, especially, maybe give them a little. They need just a little bit.
Well, they're looking for it. I think they're expecting it. All right, so we end on a biblical note, I hope. And of course, the first part, it can be found in many parts of the Bible. Say less rather than more. Now, for someone who does a podcast that often goes into the hour and a half range, to say that in many words there's much transgression. It's do as I say, not as I do at that point, but say less rather than more. In other words, online with, in mixed company at the Thanksgiving, the proverbial stereotypical Thanksgiving dinner table, choose to say less about political things rather than more. It won't hurt. It'll be okay. And just generally reading the book of Proverbs for just general things, support for wisdom, and realism. And that's what you get in Ecclesiastes. But reminded that there's nothing new And I think I could probably find somewhere in Ecclesiastes that backs up it's never quite as good as you think, and it's never quite as bad as you think. And I love, oh gosh, I can't even remember the passage now, but be not righteous over much, neither make yourself overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? So I think we make ourselves too wise about politics, about every last thing that's going on. We don't have to know everything. We don't have to be overly righteous about it because there's no pure candidates. And if we're going to have purity tests and we're going to sweat every issue with every candidate, we're never going to make it. We're not going to make it, as the young people say. So we would end there, or I would end there, and that's how I did end this list of 16. Say less rather than more. Read Proverbs. Read Ecclesiastes. So this is not like Pollyanna. Okay, live the Sermon on the Mount. That's not what we're talking about. This is wisdom issues. This is just don't be a jerk, and don't buy trouble for yourself that you don't have to. And have some confidence in God.
Yeah. I actually think that you said something earlier that should be added, number 17. You should really engage in a lot of reading and understanding of historical matters of things like this. Like, it would really help people to understand situations and have better thoughts, and maybe even say less if they would listen to like the Rest is History podcast, because it's honestly sometimes the stuff of history is more fascinating, and you can understand these things. Like, it'll help you put in perspective, of what's going on. So if you say, "Are we living through the French Revolution?" It's like, well, maybe check out some stuff on that and see what you think. Might put it in perspective. Have better. I mean, one way to say less rather than more is have some other interest. And don't let this be the only entertainment that you have. But yeah, I find that to be a good word. It's just talking about this constantly it's exhausting. If you have some buddies that you really track on talking about this stuff, maybe let them be the one that has to hear about it from you. Keep in the right company. Not everybody wants to hear you talk about wrestling, so don't do it. And not everybody wants to hear you talk about politics, but there are some who would love to hear you talk about it a lot. Chat with them.
Yeah, and to try to model this not dismissive, but also not incredibly serious attitude towards some of these things. We're going to have a show on November the 5th, but it's going to be called Taco Tuesday. So we're going to try to focus on tacos on November the 5th, because it is Tuesday after all, maybe rather than the other things. But no, we'll talk about everything. But we're going to try to have a good time and be frivolous at the same time. And if that offends you, there's a few million podcasts out there. There's only one with Resby. Unfortunately, he's not here, but he'll probably be back next week. And we appreciate Job joining us for the pastoral dimension, and hopefully maybe it's been helpful to someone. At least, if not, it's not. We're a little shorter than usual. We got that going for us. So, any parting words, Job?
No, just do the things on this list. And don't be an Erdman.
It's not new. It's not new law, not at all. So we're going to go out to the strains of this beautiful song. If you don't love your neighbor, you don't love God, which is that could be misused. But this is an old country gospel song that I don't know, surprisingly popular, more so than you would think over the years. But we'll say, look forward to Resvy's return, and he would want us to say again, don't be an Erdman.
Oh, you don't love God.
If you don't love your neighbor, If you gossip about him, if you never have mercy, if he gets into trouble and you don't try to help him, and you don't love your neighbor, and you don't love God.
What's wrong with you people?